Greetings and salutations. Today we will be covering the case of Doveland, Wisconsin. Now, ghost towns are in no way a completely new phenomenon in the United States. Neither are the concept of towns vanishing from the map. Names like Centralia, Roanoke Island, and Warner, Wisconsin come to mind when thinking of examples of such. However, Doveland, Wisconsin stands apart from these as being particularly unique. Doveland was, or supposedly was, a small Midwestern town that currently is best known for seemingly never having existed. Despite this, there are plenty of individuals, both online and in Wisconsin proper, who claim to have heard of it or have been there. Doveland is, or rather was, a town in Wisconsin that disappeared in the early 1990s. The origin of the story of Doveland seems to come from a now deleted Tumblr account. Said post has fortunately been preserved thanks to a reblog from a currently still extant Tumblr account, which has been compiled by multiple sources, and most of the information available is assumed to be from the original Doveland post. Said post goes as follows. Anyone ever heard of Doveland, Wisconsin? Okay, so there is like golf rumors, where there's basically no information available online. Even less than golf rumors, in fact. Supposedly, there was a small town in Wisconsin called Doveland that was just up and disappeared sometime in the late 1980s, early 1990s. One day, the town was there. The next, it wasn't. Every man, woman, and child vanished into thin air. Nobody remembers Doveland. There's allegedly tourist memorabilia from the town that still exists, though. T-shirts, mugs, postcards, etc. But this town is gone, and it was removed from maps and raised by powers that be, either to cover up what happened or out of fear that it might happen again. What's really weird is that most locals don't remember Doveland either, which is strange because rural Wisconsin communities are closely knit, just like every other sparsely populated area of the country. The more likely explanation is that it never existed, dumbass. But let's carry on with it just a bit more. Said town was located in the Midwest of America. Wisconsin, specifically, is known to be dotted by a myriad of sleepy small towns living in a near idealized, picturesque American dream. These small communities are usually very tight-knit, due to necessity, and somewhat insular, by said regard, making them uniquely vulnerable to any event, even the most minor, in the happenings or circumstances of the area around the town itself. Knowing that, it is not hard to believe or understand why such a small town would be able to die and vanish for any number of reasons. However, with the case of Doveland, Wisconsin, there is relatively little physical evidence that it ever existed in the first place. Few, if any, old maps or historical records can even be gathered about the chances of such a town ever existing or disappearing. There are chances that there might be some scrap of records squirreled away in some dust-filled storeroom with hard evidence proving the town's existence. However, this has not yet been found. The most that has been produced was a grainy picture, which has been cross-posted on various forums and websites with a claim that it was recovered from Doveland. There is no hard, definitive proof of this mysterious town where it would have been, other than it being somewhere within Wisconsin before its alleged disappearance. It's currently simply just a mystery, with the only concretely known facts coming from posts on 4chan, Reddit, and Tumblr. This begs the question, why do some individuals remember Doveland being a real place up until the early 1990s? Some of these individuals would have been far too young to have visited. However, they claim that their parents or grandparents have mentioned the town in passing. Some of the older individuals who seem to remember it even claim to have lived near Doveland or in the town proper or have passed through it. Now, there are some Wisconsin residents who allegedly have Doveland memorabilia, plates, curios, tchotchkes, such things, even t-shirts. Within the original posts, namely on the Tumblr post, they made the note of existing memorabilia from the town, including but not limited to t-shirts, mugs, postcards, and the like. As people kept discussing the town disappearing, individuals began to capitalize on the phenomenon. Quickly and suddenly, online vendors were producing and distributing, along with selling merchandise bearing Dovland's name and supposed iconography based on Doveland. This has made it nearly impossible to know for certain if a Doveland item was newly minted or is legitimately from the missing township. Theorists and online sleuths have speculated about Dovland's disappearance, and there have been some articles that may explain over 1,000 individual Wisconsin residents suddenly vanishing. And so, some wrote it off as a paranormal alternate reality game, or ARG, which are somewhat popular online currently. Or some people just thought people were mistaking Doveland and Doveland, which is an actual town. And quickly the tale of Doveland, Wisconsin was moved to the back burner of the internet. This was until intrepid internet detectives noticed a very odd set of Google results when curious sleuths searched more than 1,000 Wisconsinites reported missing. And who are they? Wisconsin's missing children. Considering the online claims that the town vanished overnight, these articles did little to quell the conspiracies and speculation surrounding the town. If anything, it stoked the fires of intrigue and intrepid curiosity. There are individuals who suspect that the fate of Doveland, Wisconsin's vanishing was caused by damming, in a similar manner to other small towns that have vanished off the map. One of the most common explanations for the disappearance being damming makes a lot of sense. Damming has actually destroyed many small towns in Wisconsin. This was because numerous hydraulic projects, which occurred within the state during the late 19th century, were pushed on by the march of progress and development. Warner, Wisconsin, is a perfect example of something like this occurring. The small town was unceremoniously flooded by the Wisconsin River Power Company in order to create Castle Rock Lake. Both Warner and many parts of Germantown, Wisconsin, were flooded, leaving behind a new and unique topography where Warner once stood, which is now called the Buckhorn Peninsula. Warner is not the only town in America to meet such a sad, watery fate. However, this particular town has swaths of individual theories and theorizers who ponder, believing that perhaps Doveland is now part of the many towns with a watery grave, sitting at the bottom of the lake, leaving no trace or memory of its existence behind, in the name of development, of unimpeded development. However, there are records letting us know that Warner existed, mainly evidenced by maps, which are still available today. The question of how could a town be flooded more recently than Warner, yet not appear on any map, is often brought up. However, this could be explained away by the increased complexity of bureaucracy and the fallibility of the humans doing the record keeping. There is a Tumblr post that suggests that Doveland's residents all moved out due to an economic slump, and there's yet another one that came from the original Tumblr post, which goes as follows: the locals up and left due to unstable circumstances. Said circumstances could involve economic or health issues. This explanation is rather sound and believable while being within reason, especially considering how susceptible small towns can be to even the slightest shifts or bumps in the economy. Mining towns have frequently been victims to events such as this, an example of it being once the land dries up and is stripped of all its valuables, left with nothing, the mining town will slowly die. Small towns often fade into non-existence in such a way. Residents would often just move away rather than attempt to salvage what's left of the town. Operating under that theory, many have suggested that Doveland may have died slowly and due to natural causes, gradually receding from the minds and records of locals. Currently, there are 4 main theories revolving around what happened to Doveland, and they are: first, the town just never existed, and it's probably just the ending of a game, an ARG. Number 2 is that the locals just up and left due to unstable circumstances. Either there was something that was making them sick or the economy was crashing. Number 3, the government had a project or experiment nearby or in the town that went wrong and killed everyone or caused them to have to escape, and the government then razed the town to cover up their screw-up. This could be something as simple as the government having lost yet another atomic bomb somewhere, and it being Dublin and it going off. And option number 4, the town fell into another dimension or shifted realities, disappearing somehow, kind of like the Mandela effect, or the backrooms, if you will. There are some individuals who claim Dublin was tied to Project Sanguine, or that it became a Superfund site. Project Sanguine was the US government's attempt to establish a means to improve communication between deep-sea submarines and the government itself. This is due to radio waves not being very efficient when traveling through water. The idea behind the project was to create an enormous grid of cables under roughly 41% of the state of Wisconsin, with the intent to use the bedrock as the world's largest radio antenna. The US Navy commenced the project in the early 1960s, the impetus of this being pressure from the Soviet Union during the height of the Cold War, and with the idea that it was the imperative of the state to send information to nuclear submarines so that they may stay submerged for months on end while having access to up-to-date information without needing to resurface. The concept of the state-sized antenna would in theory allow the Navy to transmit extremely low frequency waves while getting through the water, reaching the submarines with minimal interference. However, this project never came to fruition, mainly due to how much it would have cost, along with the unbelievable amounts of environmental damage it would have done. The Navy instead chose to downscale the project significantly, building the smaller version under the name Project ELF between Wisconsin and Michigan's Upper Peninsula. Said installation remained in operation between 1989 and 2004. Some of the online discourse about Doveland mentions that it was seemingly inhabited mostly by military personnel and their families. This might imply that the small town was built for the purpose of the construction of the antenna system. This would not be out of the norm for government projects. Examples of this happened during the Manhattan Project, where 3 cities were built for the military. They were Richard, Washington, Los Alamos, New Mexico, and Oak Ridge, Tennessee. This has led many to believe that the scrapped Project Sanguine may have been the reason why Dublin, a military town, potentially would have just faded out of existence due to it having no further purpose, only lingering in the memories of those who passed through it. Others, however, believe in a more fantastical iteration of the theory, proposing that Project Sanguine was actually successful and that it completed and somehow caused Dublin's disappearance, probably making it fall into another dimension or creating a rift in space and time, something like that. Or that the completion of the project caused some hazardous chemical to be released and causing the site to become a secret Superfund site. Superfund sites are any site within the U.S. that is deemed to be sufficiently contaminated and hazardous by the United States government and the EPA, classifying the site as either for cleanup or containment. It must be noted that Dublin isn't the only U.S. town to have suddenly vanished in the recent era, including modern stories. There's Uckerhammer, Iowa, and Ashley, Kansas. While one of these is just a creepypasta, the other seems to be quite real, to the point that they share similar structures, including instilling similar kinds of intrigue. As it goes, a once flourishing town full of families, friends, the titular tight-knit community suddenly vanishes for reasons unexplained and ceases to exist. This story targets the general type of fear of going missing and being forgotten. One must also consider the most likely option, that the town was just one big creepypasta that grew into an entity of its own, similar to the story of Slender Man, which had some unfortunate incidents tied to it. While theories about Dublin may be persistent and firmly within the realm of possibility, the reality is likely to be much more disappointing. Seeing similarities between posts dealing with Dublin and the fact that they seem to share the consistent patterns of storytelling and recurring theories points to the possibility that Dublin is just a creepypasta. Stories such as this one should be considered potentially dubious. However, this story, like many others, have been propagated through sites like 4chan, Reddit, and chunks of text which are constantly repeated and posted onto various forums and websites. Yet we must think and consider the consistency of the elements within the story, also potentially being a sign of corroborating accounts from different individuals. Considering the general lack of evidence along with a near total lack of any historical records or maps or even a newspaper directly referencing it, aside from some pictures claiming to have been taken there, adding on to the suspicious nature of where the majority of the posts of Doveland came from, there is not much to go on to believe that Doveland was real. The most likely possibility is that the mysterious town is little more than a spooky story. However, those fascinated by mysteries and the unknown, such as this town and the story of Doveland, have yet to fully give up on the hunt for Doveland, leaving this case as a persistent mystery. If you have remained with me until the end, I thank you, and I do hope you stay tuned for more content.